You're listening to Were You Still Talking? Hey, welcome to another Were You Still Talking? This is Joel Albrecht as usual, and on the show today I have Ricardo Martinez II. He's a storyteller, author, and the host and creator of Within the Trenches, another podcast. True stories from the 911 dispatchers who lived them. A podcast based on the experiences of being a 911 dispatcher. He's a former 911 dispatcher and supervisor of 13 years and is now the head of Within the Trenches Media, with 22 years of public safety experience. In August of 2016, Ricardo started the I Am 911 movement that spread from the United States to Canada to the UK and Australia. Its popularity and success has brought the thin gold line into the spotlight and opened the eyes of millions to what 911 dispatchers deal with on a daily basis. Ricardo, welcome to the program. It's really a pleasure having you on.
Thank you very much. It's an honor to be here. I'm excited. I'm a little nervous as well, but I'm definitely excited.
Yeah, it is. It's so weird, isn't it, that we get nervous going on a podcast when we...
Right.
You've done 500 podcasts. That's
I know.
A lot.
Yeah, it's interesting, but being on this side and everything, I do public speaking as well. So I was telling my wife before this, we'll see how this goes.
Yeah. Well, most people are okay with it. Most people, most people go away unscathed. I won't say everyone, but most people.
Well, this is good.
So the first thing I should ask you, as I was reading the intro for the third time, I realized that I don't know what the thin gold line is. What is that? For us that don't know, what is that?
Yeah, so that's basically like the designation for 911 dispatchers, 911 professionals. So for public safety officers, law enforcement officers, they're the thin blue line, and then you've got the thin red line. So you've got all these different lines that designate public safety. Dispatch is considered the thin gold line, or that glue that holds everyone together, is how I've read it before.
Oh, excellent. Oh, okay. Okay, I assumed that, but I wasn't. I wanted to make sure that that's what it was. I'm playing in the background with my stuff. There we go. I'm always messing around with the views because they like to change them up. And you, so you interview people. For one, I'm really impressed with anyone who's done 500 episodes of a podcast, and it's been pretty successful. It appears. And you, do you have a team that helps you with that? Is this all on your own, or do you have?
So it's just me. So in the beginning, though, however, so all of this really, it started from my own struggle in dispatch. So I started dispatching in 2001, but when I very first started, there wasn't any talk about any resources, or even, you're going to be dealing with some hard calls, but not how to deal with those calls, the self-care, nothing like that. So it was all just kind of learning on the job. And so I did it for 4 years. I started out in Central Florida. I went to visit family for a couple of weeks, ended up staying there for that time, and started my dispatching career there. Now, I ended up moving back home to Southwest Michigan, and I continued my dispatching career in the county, actually, that I grew up in. So during the time that I was there, I kind of hit a burnout. I was starting to have some issues with some of the calls that I was taking. And as we all know, there's a stigma with, mental health and asking for help. People don't want to look weak. And it has changed a lot now. But back then, not a lot of us were talking about it. So everything that I do now, especially the podcast, it started from my own struggle. And I didn't want anybody else to have to go through the same type of struggle that I did, where I didn't have a lot of people to talk to. But also, I buried those calls. When I would take a hard call, would bury it. Someone would say, "Are you okay?" after that call, and I would immediately say, "Of course, yeah, I'm fine," because I didn't want anyone to think, "Well, Ricardo can't hack it," And I would come home, and I would tell my wife about it, and she doesn't come from public safety, so she's just kind of there looking at me. What do I do? Come here for a hug. That's basically how that would go down. But I finally stopped caring about what people would think about me asking for help is what I mean. And I started sharing my stories. I went back to school, and all of my projects that I was doing in college had to do with 911, because I realized people don't know what dispatchers do. They don't, it's not just a phone call that comes in, there's more to it. So I would go to get my hair cut, and people would ask, "What do you do?" And I would sit there thinking, should I say what I do? Because I say that because there's always that question of, what is the worst call you've ever taken? And, sometimes I would think, why do you want to know that? I don't want to really relive that myself. So I would always tell a funny story instead, or something maybe outrageous, like, for example, someone on stilts walking naked back and forth in front of someone's living room window, that type of call I would mention. Right. Yeah. And that wasn't a call that I took. I was actually there when one of my partners took the call, and we were trying to figure out, what more is going on here. So, those were more of the calls that I would tell people. But I thought, instead of wondering why, that part of it, why don't I take this as a chance to educate the public and start sharing what it is that we do? So I started blogging about it. That's where Within the Trenches started, was a blog. And I just started sharing my calls, my side of that call, because I was there. I was there with that person.
Right.
And I wanted to share what that was like. I wanted people to know exactly what it was all about, and how a lot of those calls stick with me. And the screams, people asking for help, the calls for help, and people who have also passed away while on the phone with me. So that's what I started doing, and it ended up turning into this podcast. And I thought, because it was therapeutic for me to write about it, if I can get other dispatchers to come on and share their stories, maybe it would be therapeutic for them as well, but also it would educate the public and the rest of those who are out in the field, whether it be police, fire, EMS, or whichever other 911 professionals. They would learn from it, and we would be able to connect and relate that way.
Oh, that's fantastic. I like the whole idea. I mean, I think it's it's really brave to do. It is a good way to do therapy, because I know as a podcaster, it's really therapeutic. But blogging about it as well, kind of getting it out there. And I think most of us in the civilian world really don't have a clue of what 911 dispatchers are doing. I worked with someone who did that for a short time, and it's not like she said anything about it. But it's something I think people don't think about it much, because it can be it can be tough. That's got to be really hard. I've known people. I had a brother-in-law in law enforcement, but he worked in a county jail the whole time. So he hears all the stories too. But yeah, it really, and you're kind of on, like you were saying, you're really on both sides of the call, right? I mean, because you're dispatching for the call, and you're talking to the person that needs to help, that needs something done.
Right. Yeah. And a lot of those folks that are calling in, I mean, we are just complete empaths, where we're putting ourselves in the caller's shoes so that we can relate to a lot of what is going on, to get that information, to quickly build that rapport with that caller, to gain that trust so they can answer all of our questions. And, a lot of times people would ask, why do you ask so many questions? Why don't you just send help? And I would say, well, what you don't know is, by the second question, especially if it's an open line and we're just listening to what's going on in the background, the officers are already headed that way. Help is already headed out there. And a lot of times we would tell people, the second or third question in, help is already starting that way, so that they would know. But, we have to ask all of these questions so that the responders that are headed that way, they know exactly what's going on. If anything happens, we can continue to update them. And if we happen to lose that person on the call, we have to immediately call back. We have to put it in the narrative, just lost the caller. Then we got to call back and hope, did they pick up that phone?
Oh,
And
wow. Yeah. Yeah.
sometimes that's giving me goosebumps right now because I'm
Right.
remembering a lot of that because there were moments, especially back then. Now it's a lot easier. There's more technology where you can like pinpoint someone's location. But if someone is calling on a cell phone, especially back then when and I say back then, but this was even, 2010, 2011, location stuff with cell phones wasn't that great. So if you have someone calling in and you've got the phone number, but they don't know their address and you just happen to lose them, there's a process of trying to get back to them or trying to find them. And that weighs heavy on all of us.
Oh my gosh, I can imagine. And from listening to your other podcasts, I realized that probably the same thing is true going the other way, where you realize, well, I don't need to call anybody because they want movie times or something.
Right. Yeah, believe it or not, for those who are listening, there have been
Wow.
people who would call on 911 to say, this is not an emergency. I apologize for calling 911, but I didn't have the number for the non-emergency line. And, sometimes if someone is calling in and it's not busy, of course, we'd go ahead and help them. Or we would say, here's the non-emergency line. Call me back on that line so that you're not tying up an emergency line. They're going to get me either way, right? But they would call in to say, can you tell me what time the parade starts today? Or do you know if such and such city is doing trick-or-treating after all?
Oh my
I'm not Google, but I'll help you. I'll definitely help you. So we would have just a sheet of paper. We would have it written down if for that day was the 4th of July or there was a parade going on for Memorial Day or something, and someone would call. We would have it listed so we could say right away. However, if things are going crazy at the time, we would just have to say, I'm sorry, I can't help you right now. You're going to have to either look it up online or call back later. So sometimes that's how that would go down as well.
Right. Wow. Which is, I lost my question now. I had I had something related to this, but I can't quite remember. You said sometimes you're busier. What size of a area were you working in?
So when
Like where?
I don't have the complete numbers or anything like that, but when I very first started, and I can put it this way, this was a small, sleepy town in Central Florida. Not a lot of people have heard the name of it, but it's called Frostproof. So again, Central Florida, it's about 35, 40 minutes southeast and southwest of Tampa and Orlando. So from either city, you go central, you'll find it. And most people would know like Lakeland, Winter Haven, or anything like that. And it's close to there. So this city, we had probably about 12 officers, sworn officers that were working for the city. And that's including the sergeant, lieutenant, and the chief. And the city had 2 traffic lights and a McDonald's and a grocery store.
Wow.
So if you can imagine, it's a small town, right? But when I moved back to Southwest Michigan, there's over 100,000 people. This is the area that we had in Allegan County, and I'm sure it's a lot higher. So if anybody's listening from Allegan, I apologize. But there would be 3 of us that would work for the entire county. And we have several cities, and you've got your sheriff's department, you've got city police, and then you've got all the fire departments as well as EMS. So there's 3 of us. If you think about that, there's 3 of us during the week.
Yeah, that seems pretty nuts.
Right. On the weekend, there would be 4 of us. And if there was bad weather, then we would have a 5th person come in. But you've got 1 person on phones, 1 person on main radios, and then you've got 1 person who's doing backup phones and radios, but they're also the person who is running warrants, license checks, and all of that. So if I'm the only one on phones at that time, even though I have the backup, but if they're doing something else, I'm doing triage style with phone calls. If it's going crazy, I'm taking phone calls, typing what's going on at the same time, answering the radio for fire or EMS, listening to what's going on in the background, but also maybe yelling something over across the room to whoever's on radios, still typing in what it is that needs to go into that narrative, but yelling it over so that they have it even faster. And all of this is happening at one time, but 911 doesn't stop. So it's not just one emergency. These are constant.
This is all the time. Wow. That sounds, well, it sounds exciting, but really, really nuts. And it kind of helps us realize why whenever you call a doctor's office or a dentist's office or any medical office, it says, if this is an emergency, dial 911. Otherwise,
yes.
I find that interesting now that every single call, they get that. But now we also have, is it 988?
Yes,
that it?
yes.
988.
So there's 988 as well. That's for the suicide hotline. Is basically what it is now. Instead of the long 10-digit number that they had before, now just like 911, there are 3 digits that someone will be able to call and get help that way as well. And if it's something to where they need 911, they're able to get a hold of 911 and then just come together for that specific call.
Oh, I see.
Mhm.
But that just seems like a huge thing to me, because we've gone from, like you said, nobody wanting to talk about mental illness to now having a faster way for people to get help. Because
Right.
I know that's a big thing, is that most people in that situation don't get help, and that's why we lose a lot of people, especially in the last. I know recently it's been worse. Yeah.
With that, that specifically, there's a lot of people who would say, when is the most busy time? And a lot of times, especially for that specifically, those who are calling in who just they don't want to live anymore. It's always around the holidays. You would think, the holidays are the most happy time, families coming together, November, Thanksgiving, you got Christmas, you've got those 2 main ones, right? However, there's a lot of people who are not with their family. There's people that are alone. And during those times, that's a lot of times when people are the most depressed. And sometimes people will call in just so that they can talk. They just need someone to talk to. They
Right.
want help, and we do everything we can to get that help for them.
It really makes sense to me, because there's so much, the holidays have so much pressure. I mean, even if you do have family you're getting together with, there's a whole lot of pressure sometimes to have everything right, to do the Hallmark Christmas deal. And then,
right.
and then there's everything in media. All media is pushing how great Christmas is. And isn't this wonderful? Well, not necessarily. And you also might not be a person who celebrates Christmas on top of that. So, but yeah,
Right.
I can imagine that can be a really lonely time. So I've heard that before, that Christmas is one of the hardest times for people who have issues with depression and loneliness. It because they just push how you should be doing all this stuff, but then if you're not, it's not very helpful.
Yeah,
Not very helpful at all.
You're left out. Is
Right.
basically how it goes down.
Yeah, you're just left out. So now, how did you come up with the I am 911? It's the hashtag I am 911. So when did that come about? And that sounds like a really good thing.
So that was 2016 when I had started that. I was already out of dispatch. It was 2013 that I left dispatch. This was around the time that I had really started pushing the podcast. There was a private 911 solutions company that actually found me through the podcast and plucked me out of dispatch, and I started working for them.
Oh,
and
wow. That's
they were a supporter of what I do, which was, sharing these important stories, these powerful stories. So they continued supporting the podcast while I was working for them. I became their communications director, and I was going around to different 911 conferences and doing presentations for them, but also doing the podcast, having attendees of the conference come on and share stories. Now, during the time that I was out there was 2 main 911 organizations that were trying to work a reclassification for 911 professionals. And the reason for that is because 911 professionals are currently listed under the clerical class versus the protective class with police, fire, and EMS. So they were trying to do this reclassification, both of these organizations. However, there wasn't a lot of traction. I guess I'll put it that way. There wasn't a lot of traction. So what I wanted to do was try to raise some awareness, try to help them out. But I wanted to do it in a different way. I wanted to do it dispatch style. I wanted it to be raw and in your face. And I had already been sharing stories for a while, and I noticed that both organizations were looking for stories. Now, what I wanted to do was share stories, but I wanted people to share them through my outlet to not confuse people with what they were doing. I mean, it was the same thing in a sense, but this was going to be a little bit more, like I said, in your face than what they were doing. But it was all to raise awareness for the same cause. So 2016, it's an evening after one of the national conferences, and I'm sitting there just kind of thinking, and I thought, there have been a lot of calls that I've taken in the past, and a lot of those have stuck with me. What if I was to just share a glimpse, just a glimpse into one of those calls? But also, one of the things that we deal with in dispatch is we don't always get closure, and that always sticks with us. So why don't I add that in there as well? Just a short blurb of a story that doesn't have the entire story. You don't get that closure from it, but I want to put it out there and just see what happens. So I ended up creating a meme, and it had a full moon, and what it had on there was, "I heard your last breath the night you flipped your four-wheeler," and hashtagged it on there, "I am 911." The reason I did it that way is, one, I'm claiming that call as the call that I took, right? But to me, it's also another form of communication where these people that I took this call for their child, that this accident happened, I'm never going to meet them. However, if they were to happen to read this story, they would know that somebody was there with them throughout that entire time until the phone call ended, that I was there with them. And I put it out there. I put it on the podcast page on Facebook, and I asked others to do the same thing. Let's raise awareness this way to show the difference between emergency dispatchers, clerical workers, and commercial dispatchers. And it exploded. I ended up leaving my in-laws' house. Again, I was in Florida at the time, and I was with my son, and we were going to my mother's home. We were going there to have dinner, and it's only about a 10-minute drive. And my phone starts exploding with notifications. And my son says to me, "Dad, what did you do?" And I said, "I think I struck a chord."
I posted something on social media.
Right. Yeah, that was how many were going through. And it got to the point where the app wasn't sending me notifications anymore. So people started sharing their stories, and they started coming in. And what started out as a way to raise awareness for reclassification quickly turned into peer support. Because what I found out was all of these 911 professionals that were sending in these stories, a lot of them were saying that they had been holding on to these calls forever. One person specifically wrote saying that their hands were still shaking after typing out the story, but that they were so grateful for the I Am 911 movement that they were able to get it out, that now they had an outlet because these stories were all anonymous. And I think one of the things that really set it off was I ended up posting later on saying, if you don't know how to create a meme to submit this story, simply send me the text and I will do it. And it exploded even more from there. I had to get friends to come on to be admin to help with this. And, even like with the whole podcast, in the beginning, I had started it by episode 5. I brought on someone as a co-host, and her name is Whitney. I was her supervisor at the time in dispatch. She's now the deputy director at the center that we used to work at. but I ended up moving to Fort Wayne. She stayed in Michigan, so she will always be my co-host. But I ended up moving on and continuing to do all this. So, the movement, it started there, 2016, to raise awareness, but again, quickly turned into peer support. And people were sharing stories all over the world. It was in Canada, then it was in the UK. They did their own as I am 999, and then Australia was I am 000 or I am 000. So all of these stories ended up coming up, and I'm still sharing stories from about September of 2016. These stories come in almost daily sometimes, and I put them out as fast as I can.
Wow, that's really amazing. I mean, it's hard enough being around someone if they're taking their last breath, someone but to have that, but to be on the phone with them and it's really a stranger, and then you don't really know what happens. I mean, there must be times when you don't know if it was their last breath or if it just sounded like it. Maybe you get do you even get follow-up from emergency crews? Do they follow up, or do you often get kind of left wondering? Because that's got to be so hard.
The majority of the time, we're in the dark, so we don't know. And you're right. It could be a call where we thought we lost the person, and we end up finding out later the person made it. And man, that feeling, I can't even explain it. I can only explain it as, opening up a Christmas present, and finding something so amazing, and you're so happy. And this is a life. You find out that this person is alive after you've gone home. For me, I lived about 45 minutes away from dispatch. So some nights I would take some of these hard calls, and not knowing what was going on, I would drive home in silence, just trying to decompress, but yet still hearing and picturing everything. Because for those out in the field responding, they get to see all of this. For me, I have to put these pieces together from what I'm listening to. And sometimes it's worse than what it is. Now, there have been times where I've actually had the chance to have someone tell me what happened, and I felt better. Mm-hmm. But also, a lot of times we take this stuff really hard, where you start asking, did I ask enough questions? What if I would have changed my questioning? What if I would have done this? Or what if I would have done this? And every time, there's nothing else that you can do. I mean, you're on the phone, and one call specifically had to do with an infant that did not make it. And I'm giving the mother CPR instructions. And we're going through and going through and going through. And that was one that really messed me up. And my supervisor at this time, I wasn't a supervisor, but my supervisor was sitting next to me, and she asked me if I was okay. And I said, yeah, sure, I'm fine. And she knew I wasn't fine. And especially as the hours were going on, her husband was actually the sergeant that was out there in the call. And she asked him to come in. And he comes in and he sat next to me. And he said, "Are you okay?" And I said, "No, man, actually, I'm not okay." I said, "I know she knows that. That's why you're here." So one of the good things, though, was before he came in, someone from EMS called up. Now, after a lot of these calls, EMS or fire will call up for their run number and their times. And we might get a chance to ask, if we have time, what happened on that call. So EMS calls in, asks for the person who took the call. Now, again, the infant didn't make it. And I get on the phone, and they said, "Ricardo, I just want you to know that when we got on scene, they were doing textbook CPR. And there was nothing else that you could have done. You did everything that you could do." And that right there was one of the things that I needed to know, because that sticks with me. Did I do enough? There was no longer any questions or anything. It was, I did do enough. They told me, they got there, they were doing textbook CPR. So then when the sergeant shows up, he told me exactly what happened. And I was okay after that. That's what I needed. That's one of the things that I needed, was to know that I had done everything I could for those folks that were calling in for help.
That's that's amazing, because that's another thing that I don't really think about. I guess I just assumed that you would get follow-up, from people that were doing it.
Right,
It's
yeah.
just an assumption. Yeah, but of course not. Of course, that doesn't always happen. So, you do the podcast, you were doing blogging before that. Have you gotten other forms of help for handling the mental part of it? Have you been able to, are there groups that actually, do you get together with other people to talk about it, or do you have counseling about it? Have you found other ways to try and help yourself and others with dealing with this?
Yeah, so for me, I'll be honest, I've not actually gone to a therapist myself to talk about a lot of this, because for me, once I started writing about all of it, once I started talking about all of it, that was basically my therapy. And every time I've done an episode and I've talked to someone, I've been able to get it out that way. Now, there is a question that I ask some of my own guests at the end, and the one question always is, if you could go back in time with the knowledge that you have now to talk to yourself in the beginning, what advice would you give yourself? And that comes from me asking myself, and it was interesting. And I wanted to ask others to see what they would say. So for me, if I could go back in time, I would get more into, one, yoga, and two, meditation, because the last year and a half, I got into both of these, and that was therapeutic for me as well. Those breathing techniques helped me while on a tough call. I was able to keep myself centered and even more calm than I was before. A lot of people, you hear sometimes on recordings, right? In the news, you hear dispatch on a recording, and sometimes people sound like they don't care. It'll be in the comments of a news story or something, like they shouldn't be there. They don't care. Listen to their voice. No, the voice is even, because even though we are calm, cool, and collected, in the back of our minds, we're right there with that caller.
Yeah.
We're freaking out with them, but it's our job to keep everyone calm all at the same time. So with all of that, what I ended up doing was, especially with the I Am 911 movement, is I created this session, which is a peer support session, and it's called Imagine Listening. And I had all the attendees at this one conference. I started it in Indiana, and the attendees that were there, what I wanted to do was to share more I Am 911 stories, but this would be with a live audience. This was also part of the podcast. There's episodes on there. There's no names, no nothing. It's their voices. What I wanted them to do is to be able to be in an environment where they could share their calls. It could be a save or one of the hard ones that they've been holding on to. And that was therapeutic for all of those that were in there. Now, when I did it that first time, though, I didn't know how it was going to go down. I actually had a friend of mine sitting next to me, and he looks at me and he goes, "Bro, how do you think this is going to happen? Or how do you think it's going to go down?" I said, "I have no idea, but let's see. Hopefully this works out." And I explained what we were going to be doing. It was an hour. It's an hour session. So the first 30 minutes, imagine listening. We share our own I Am 911 stories, whether it be in that form of I was the one who took this call, or I was there, or you just simply share your call. Just share a story. Again, it could be a save as well. But the last 30 minutes is open mic, and that's where we share the funny stuff that happens in 911. So we start out emotionally intense, right? And then we end with some of the funnier calls. because it's not about, the callers. Like, nobody's, making fun of anybody who's calling in. It's the situation. So like the one that I mentioned a moment ago, somebody would share a story saying, yeah, I took a call once where this guy was in his living room, and out his living room window, he saw another guy who was naked and on stilts and kept walking back and forth. It's that humor that happens because, sometimes you get these calls that come in and you think, is this real life? Yes, it is. This stuff happens.
Kinds of weird stuff. So many strange things happen in life. Yeah.
Right. Yeah, very much so. I had someone call in once where and I can never remember what it's called, but they use one of those machines to press on their neck to be able to speak, right? And they sound kind of robotic. Like hello, that's how they sound.
Mm-hmm.
So this was just a verbal domestic call. It was an argument between my caller and their daughter. And immediately when I say 911, where's your emergency? I hear, I need help. And immediately I thought, what? This is not the voice that I was expecting. Okay. We continue going through it. And I kept saying the person's first name, which was Carl. And kept going, Carl, Carl this, Carl that. Well, by the end of the call, when the officers got there, Carl had enough, because Carl ends up saying to me, my name is not Carl, it's Carol. This thing makes me sound like a man. Ha, ha, ha. And I said, I'm so sorry, but also I had to laugh with God. Carol.
Yeah. Well, at least Carol was laughing. That's great.
Yes. She had a very good sense of humor.
That's great.
But that's some of the stuff that happens. So that session is therapeutic in many ways by getting some of those harder calls out, but also laughing is good medicine. And it's these situations that people end up in that sometimes, like I said, you would never think is something that would happen. But also, the moment you think you've taken the most outrageous call, something like that, another one comes in and takes the cake.
And so what made you think this would be a good career? How did you get started in this? And what made you decide to be a 911 dispatcher? Because that is a difficult job.
Yeah, I kind of fell into it, really. A lot of people, like there's people that I've spoken to who have said, I come from public safety family, and my father was an officer or a firefighter or whichever. Not me. When I ended up moving or going to visit in Florida, I only had retail management under my belt at the time. I managed a clothing store in a mall. I also managed a video store. For those who are listening, that's dating me. A video store.
Well, so did Quentin Tarantino. So you're in good.
That's
company.
Right. Yes, exactly. Yes. And in the video store that I managed for, there's only one left in the world, and I believe it's in Alaska.
Oh, Blockbuster?
Yeah, Blockbuster.
As far as I know, there's still one here in Bend, Oregon.
For real?
Yeah.
Nice. Well, awesome. Well, there you go. There's two then. That is excellent. So that's what I had under my belt, was a lot of that type of experience, just retail management. So while I'm in Florida, that's what I was looking for. I was looking for a job in retail because that's what I knew, and I had that management experience. And before that, my mom had said to me, you think you might want to look for a job? And I said, oh, there you go. Okay, yes, I apologize. Yes, I'm about 19, right? I'm 19, so I'm looking for a job. I couldn't find anything, and just out of the blue, she says, your cousin's husband knows the chief of police. And I'm just kind of staring at her like, okay, did something happen? And she goes, well, we were talking, and she said that they're hiring dispatchers. Now, the only thing I knew about 911 was one of my most favorite shows growing up, which was Rescue 911 with William Shatner. And that's all I knew. And so I said, you know what? I'll try it. I have no idea what this is all about, but I'll go ahead and try it. And I called, got an interview, went in. I thought the interview went great. And then I didn't hear from them for about 2 months. So I thought, okay, well, I guess I didn't get the job. And then one day, I was getting ready to lay down to take a nap, and my grandmother comes into the room and she starts yelling at me in Spanish. And she's telling me, the police are here. The police are here. And she goes, what did you do? And I said, what? I said, I didn't do anything. And she goes, you need to get out there and figure out what's going on. So I go outside and it's the chief of police. And I said, oh, hey, chief, because again, this is a small city. Mm-hmm. And I only lived down the road. I didn't live far, maybe 5 minutes or so from the police department. And he goes, hey, Ricardo, I just wanted to see if you still wanted the job. And I said to him, well, of course I do, but I didn't think I got it. It's been about 2 months or so. And he goes, well, our background checks take a long time, but we really liked you, and we would like for you to come with us, be one of us, and join the department, be dispatch. And I said, okay. Now, a lot of times when you're about to start a new job, they sometimes will say, well, you start next Monday, or, take the weekend or whatever.
Right.
And that's what I had asked. I said, so do I start next week? And he goes, you start tonight.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
I mean, usually I don't think the chief of police usually shows up to give you the job in most cities.
True.
I don't think that's usually how it's done, but
yeah, no, but this one it did. and I said, really, tonight? And he goes, you want the job, don't you? You still want the job? And I said, no. I apologize. I do. I do want the job still. And he goes, okay. He goes, you start tonight, midnight shift, 10 p to 6 a. And I said, okay. So he left. I go back in the house, explain to my grandma what happened, and I go to take that nap. I go in that night, and I walk in, and I meet my trainer, and he shows me everything. And of course, I'm just in shock, like, wow, this is great. This is really cool. I'm here. I'm going to do this. And he takes a 911 call. I observe. And once he's done, he turns around and looks at me and says, you're next.
Oh.
And I said, what?
Wow. Number 2 call of the night. Here it is.
Yeah, I thought he was joking. Right. But then he just stone cold look and looks at me and says, no, I'm serious. He goes, this is the only way you're going to learn is by doing the job. And I remember standing there and I said, there's nothing else? Like, there's no other training or anything? And he goes, you'll have some training. He goes, but this is how we're going to start. And basically what he had said was there's 3 things that you need. 1 is to have some thick skin, 2, common sense, and 3 is to be human. And that's always stuck with me. And I'm sitting there sweating, waiting for this first call to come in, because it's 911. You don't know what it's going to happen. You don't know what's going to come in. That first call comes in. 911, where's your emergency? And I hear, that was a mistake. This was a butt dial. And thank the Lord.
Okay, you're up again.
Right. Yeah. So it was kind of calls like that. And the following week, I actually ended up taking a 40-hour beginner's dispatching course. So there was more training to it. Okay. But those first few nights, it was thrown into the lion's den.
Well, it was interesting. A bit ago, you were talking about how one of the things is to be calm on a 911 call. And that reminds me of airline dispatchers, too, because it's similar. I mean, they are dispatchers, but it's the same thing. If they have a pilot whose engines have just gone out, they can't go, oh, my God.
Right. Yes.
You got to be you got to keep it together and talk like you've always been talking and whatever it is.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Especially because if you get to know a lot of the people who are on the other side of the radio, and it goes both ways. Mm-hmm. So, for example, if I'm talking to an officer who his voice, that tone never changes, but when it does, something is happening. Right. And you're now, who do I send to them? Or you just say over the air, such and such is in this location, and they start responding already. Sometimes you don't even get the chance to key up because someone is already keying up saying, I'm headed that way. But for myself, if they hear my voice go up a little higher, then they know as well. Plus, they can hear over the radio when I open up the air, they can probably hear all of the lines going crazy. But if my voice goes up a little bit, they too know things are not going well in dispatch.
Right. Think something's off. So did you, in a community that size, did you have officers that would get out, a ways out from the nearest officer, nearest help?
No, because a lot of times there would be, you've got the sheriff's department, right? You've got deputies who are out there, and there would be, I'm trying to think now, like 5 or 6 in these different sections. But also in those sections, you've got the state police, and you also have city police. So there was always someone who was pretty close that could go and assist if need be. There's only a few times that I can remember where it was a little bit before someone was going, because there's some that are on another call and they're like, I'm trying to clear, or I'm clearing and I'm heading there right now. And the majority of the time, that's what it would be. I'm clearing right now, leaving this call, going to them. But you've got that time in between there where clock's ticking and there's something that's going on, and they're going that way. So you're sitting there with the rest of your crew in dispatch and just hoping and praying that they get there fast enough to be able to assist each other. So we're there. Yeah. And that's another hard part.
That's got to be really rough. Waiting for the time to tick by. That's got to be really tough. And you can only go so fast. I mean,
right? Yeah,
roads aren't that fast. So
right, yeah, you've got to. They're going as fast as they can, but also within the law, but also keeping themselves safe. Because if if something ends up happening to them as they're getting there, that creates even more. That's what is going on. But yeah, sometimes you're just kind of sitting in there, and there were a couple times that I remember specifically where I heard something that nobody ever wants to hear over the radio, whether it's in dispatch or those that are out on the road, the shots fired. Yeah. And you immediately, for us, we would call out and over the radio that, that has happened. We would call a certain code, and all of the main traffic would stay on a channel, and the others would go to another channel. So it's just, for example, if I'm the one who's on that main radio, it's me and everyone who is on that. And every time something would come out, I would repeat it, give a time, and it would type it in, and it would just keep going and going and going until someone said to clear, and everybody can resume normal traffic. But for those moments, even more so than taking a phone call, those on the radio, you're trying to get them help as fast as possible, and everybody is getting there. The adrenaline is going. Then afterwards, you realize that your shoulders have been up the whole time, and when you let them down, okay, we can actually breathe now.
Oh man, yeah, I can't imagine really. And overall, even as stressful as it is, is it something you are positive about, and you enjoyed, sure. And you'd have other people do it?
I miss it. I definitely miss it. Yes, I miss it. But thinking back when I was going to leave, it was a difficult decision, mainly because I felt like I was betraying my own there in dispatch. And it took a lot of conversation also for me to choose myself, to choose what I was going to end up doing, but also too, because I realized that what I was going to end up doing or hoping to do was to change 911 as it was. And what I mean by that was sharing these stories, because nobody was sharing these stories. I mean, there might be a couple stories here and there that were going out there, but not in the way that I was doing it as part of the podcast or writing about it, doing, these Imagine Listening sessions, the I Am 911 movement, all of that stuff that, ended up coming later. I ended up realizing that I was going to be helping those that I worked with, but 911 as a whole, by doing what I was doing, because it seemed like for a long time we weren't allowed to feel. You would just take those calls, go to the next one, take a call, go to the next one. You didn't have a chance to really decompress. If you did have a chance, we have what's called a quiet room, and you can go into this room and just sit on the couch, and that's what it is. It's quiet in there. It's a quiet room. You just sit and chill with your thoughts and take a deep breath, and you come right back in and you start taking those calls again. And it's not all doom and gloom. There's a lot of good calls. There's a lot of good ones that I remember. Now, when my grandmother passed away, I was the one who took that call.
Oh, wow.
And
that's what I want to hear. I know that you do the podcast about the worst day.
Yeah.
So let's hear the best day.
So, besides that part with my grandmother, passing away and all, and me being the one to take that call, there were others where this one specifically that I have, and this was early on too. And this is when I'm back in Michigan working for the county that I grew up in. It was wintertime, and a lady calls in and she is just beside herself, just screaming. And I'm trying to get her location and what it is that is going on. And what happened was her children were sledding, right? And they were all trying to see who could get the furthest. Whoever got the furthest would win.
Mm-hmm.
The youngest was the one who got the furthest. However, the youngest ended up sledding onto a pond, and it was thin ice, and she was in the middle of the pond and nobody could get to her. And mom was afraid that she was going to go in. So she's calling. I'm keeping her as calm as possible. Already have help going out that way. And I get off the phone with her, and a little while later, we end up hearing over the radio, we got her off, she's safe. And that was one of the best moments. But what I wasn't expecting was a thank you. And the thank you was in the form of a newspaper ad. So it's now the weekend, and probably about a week or so later, and my supervisor that was working that shift, she's reading the local newspaper and says, "Hey, who took this call?" And of course, nobody wants to hear that.
That's the last thing you want to hear from your supervisor, right?
Right, because
not because
me.
I don't know.
Yeah, because I knew she was reading the newspaper, and she says that, and I said, "What call? What call are you talking about?" And then she starts talking about it a little bit, and I said, "That was my call." And what it was the family thanking dispatch and all of the responders who went out there to help their daughter. And I still have that newspaper clipping from that time. It was 2007, maybe 2008, something like that. It was pretty far back.
That's awesome, though. That's absolutely awesome. Yeah.
I have that. Just one more really quick here. I was telling you about how, a lot of times people call in and they don't want to live anymore. And there was one evening that a lady called in, and she was suicidal, and she was telling me that she no longer wanted to live because she was dealing with a lot of back pain and neck pain, to the point where it was so excruciating she just didn't want to live anymore. And what she didn't know, and I'm a firm believer that some of these phone calls are meant for us because we might have some experience that others don't. Mm-hmm. And for this call specifically, what this person didn't know at the time was that I myself was dealing with a lot of neck and back pain, to the point where it was going up to like my temple, my eyeball. I mean, it was horrible. And the doctors didn't know what to do. They didn't know what it was. They just kept telling me it was stress. I needed to be less stressed. And I said to my doctor, "Do you know what I do for a living?" And he goes, "No." And I said, "I'm a 911 dispatcher." And he goes, "Oh, well, I guess you can't lose the stress that much." And I said, "Oh, thanks, man."
Man. Yeah.
So that's when I got into yoga. Now I had been
Oh.
my wife had been doing yoga and stuff for a long time, and she's like, "You should try it. You should try it." And I said, "No, because the moment I do a pose wrong, someone's gonna make fun of me or whatever." Well, I was at the point where I couldn't deal with the pain anymore, so I did yoga, and the first session of yoga that I did, the pain was all gone. So
Wow. Wow.
yeah,
That's
yes,
nice.
that's how powerful it was. Yeah, and I still practice it today. So while I'm on the phone with this lady, I decided to tell her this because this is where you become human
Hmm.
and you relate. And I thought, what the heck? I'm going to give it a shot. I need to keep her on the phone, but also try to keep her mind off of what it was that she originally called for until help can get there. So I tell her about my back pain, my neck pain, and that I did yoga. And we were talking about yoga, and help got there. And she said to me, "Thank you. I don't want to kill myself anymore because now there's another way." And when I got off the phone with her, I just I just sat there and thought, man, it really do make a difference. And every time I practice yoga now, I think of that person. We've had that connection.
Oh, that's awesome. That's awesome. I mean, I've actually been there. I've had terrible pain problems that no one knew. Nothing helped. I wish yoga would have helped. Eventually, it subsided, and yeah. Now I could probably do yoga. I'm far enough along. I could probably go start doing it. But yeah, that's amazing. And I actually, while I was hearing that, I'm curious. When you get those calls, who do you send to that call? Do you send EMTs, or you have anyone in the area? If it's a call like that, and you think someone's going to take their life, who ends up showing up?
When we end up taking those calls, we are already sending out EMS and police that way. And police will go out first, and EMS will stage in the area. And then they'll have them go in, because if this is someone with a weapon, they need to secure the scene before EMS can go in, just in case, things go differently, right, than what you want. So those are the folks that end up going out first. And you've some areas have fire rescue where they end up going as well, because those are volunteer, and they're going, but they're still staging in the area. They still have to stage in the area no matter what. And PD will get out there, secure, find the person and talk through it, and then they'll have EMS come in. Now there's some times where people don't get that chance, and they end up doing it over the phone, or they'll say, I just wanted someone to find me or something, and then they'll hang up.
Oh, yikes.
A lot of those times it doesn't turn out well. But the ones that I've taken, especially this one where I believe during this time there was a lot of factories that were closing down. A lot of people were getting laid off, and this person had gotten laid off. He lost everything. His wife had left him as well, and he called up and he wanted to do a suicide by cop. He told me he had a rifle on him.
Oh, and he told you that?
Oh yeah.
He told you that's what he wanted to do.
Mm-hmm. He told me that this was exactly what he wanted to do. Now, it wasn't right away.
Wow.
I went through all the questioning, and I said, we have people headed your way to help you, and trying to negotiate, for him to put the gun down and everything. And but once he heard that the people were headed that way, that's when he said, I'm going to do a suicide by cop. I don't deserve to live anymore because I've lost everything. And was able to get him to put the gun down. An officer went out there, and as far as I know, at least at that time, he was okay. He ended up being okay. He just really needed somebody to talk to and to let him know that things were going to be all right, no matter what. But that's one of those where EMS was still staging in the area, but kind of far, because this person had a weapon, right? And we had officers that were going to be headed that way as well. So the response still the same, but This one was a little more intense.
Yeah, I can imagine. Wow.
Now, one of the things as well with with Imagine Listening and all is, for all that time that I've been collecting stories, especially in the beginning, people kept asking, and this was right off the bat too, are you going to turn this into a book? And I'd said to them, maybe. I want to see where this goes. So from 2016 up to just recently now, 2023, I had been collecting all of this stuff, and I finally turned it into a book. And it's of the same name as the session that I do at conferences, which is Imagine Listening. And it's the tagline is "Your worst day is our everyday." Now on the cover, I talked about in the beginning where I asked people if, with the stories, I had been talking about that session. But what ended up happening with that is that, nobody wanted to share a story. Kind of what I thought was going to happen. Nobody wanted to share out loud. But what I did was I asked if any of you would like to write it down instead and hand it up. We'll read them for you. And immediately people started ripping pieces of paper and sharing paper and writing and writing and writing. And then it took one person to share a story out loud. And then more people shared and more people shared, exactly how I had hoped that it was going to happen. So on the cover, you see some of these stories that were actually handwritten. These are the ones that were handed in during those sessions. But the meat of the book are the stories that were submitted in. Now, one of the things that happened with the movement as well was there were callers that were sending in their own stories, their side of a call. For example, someone saying, if it wasn't for this dispatcher, I might have killed myself this night. Basically they're thanking dispatch for that. So there were so many stories that came in and continue to come in that now this is book one of a series of books. They're going to highlight these stories.
Because I was thinking you're going to need a bigger book.
Oh, yes. Yeah, this is
doesn't seem like enough. Okay.
Yeah.
I'm relieved to hear that.
Yes, this is book one. And, as I was telling you just a little while ago about my grandmother, page 7 of this book, some of my personal I Am 911 stories are in here. And page 7 is the one that has to do with my grandmother. And if I could, I'd just read it here really quick. It's very short. It just says, "You were with me from the beginning, Grandma. 27 years later, I took the 911 call when you died. How fitting to be there for me in the beginning. And I was there for you in the end. I miss you, Grandma. I am 911.
That is really beautiful. It's a beautiful sentiment. It's a beautiful story. And I thank you for sharing it here. That's really awesome.
Thank you for the opportunity.
Yeah, you're very welcome. We should. I guess I should think about wrapping it up. I always have a hard time ending a podcast.
Yeah, I know. Sometimes the conversation you just continue, right?
Yeah. We could just keep going, but
right.
Yeah, and I have before. It's harder on the Zoom, so I try not to over stress my guests. But wow, really appreciate you having you on. Of course, the book, the podcast, several other links will be in the show notes. Check it out. This has been. Were you still talking? This is Joel Albrecht, and my guest today has been Ricardo Martinez. I almost said that wrong, but I got it right, I think. He is a podcast host himself. I Am 911 is the movement. Check out his podcast. Check out the book. And thank you so much for listening once again. We will be back, I don't know, sometime. I know my podcast has been a little bit sketchy, but before I ask my outro, how often do your podcasts go up?
They come out weekly. Sometimes if there's a conference going on, there'll be like 2 or 3 that come out in 1 week, but weekly.
Okay. Yeah. Fantastic. Thank you so much once again. And as I always say, be good to each other. Then you won't have to do as many 911 calls, and be good to yourself. Thank you.